Hello there! This week, I am going to take a field trip. I'm headed to one of the other best preserved ghost towns from the 1800s, Bodie State Park. There's a lot to learn from Bodie. I'm gonna get to go there when nobody else is in the park and talk to people responsible for preserving that town all these years. So let's go. I've been wanting to make a video about Bodie for quite a long time, for a few reasons. First, Bodie is another abandoned mining town from the 1860s here in California. There's actually a lot of residents of Cerro Gordo that made their way over to Bodie and vice versa. So there's a lot of shared history. There's a lot to learn over there. Second, a lot of Bodie is still there. You know, they have over 100 remaining buildings from the 1800s that they preserve. And there's a whole team and a whole mentality and process and theory that goes into preserving the buildings of Bodie that I think I could learn a lot from. You know, obviously preservation is always at the front of my mind here at Cerro Gordo. And so if I can learn something from what they've done right over there, then maybe I can bring it back here to Cerro Gordo. And third, and almost most pressing, back in, I think, 1989, in the hills directly surrounding Bodie, the town, a Canadian mining company came in, started taking samples to potentially open up an open pit mine just outside of Bodie. In fact, this lease was given by the family who once owned Bodie but sold it to the state. Sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what happened at Cerro Gordo. All right, so the park just opened here at Bodie. It's just past 9 a.m. and we are the first ones in the park today. So, as the story goes, in 1861, there was a mill established here and the town started to grow. And in 1861, there was only about 20 people here. But by 1880, there's something like 10,000 people that used to live here. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the buildings here at Bodie were lost to fire over the years, but there's still just an insane amount of ones that remain. And so we're going to take a look around. Something I'm always trying to figure out when I explore these different places is, what was it like living here or being here or working here back in the day? Not just on a functional level, you're not just, these were the motions that the miner went through, but on the personal level, these are people with hopes and dreams and desires and stresses and, clothes they had to pick up from the laundromat and groceries to get from the store. And so when I was walking through the town, I really wanted to get to those buildings that must have had some deeper meaning or purpose to the townsmen there. What are the buildings that would have really stood out back in the daily life of people in Bodie? For me, the very first one of that is the church. It's the very first thing that you see as you walk into Bodie. So the first building you come to when you come into Bodie is this. This is the Methodist Church, the only remaining church built in 1882. If you look in, it just looks so beautiful and peaceful. And no matter whether you're religious or not, connecting to something higher than yourself, whether that's a religion or a community or a belief group or whatever it happens to be, must have brought some type of purpose and meaning to these guys' lives. They're back there 12 hours a day mining, not necessarily because they loved rock, but for money. And there must have been a subsect of those people that were looking for some purpose or organization to this chaotic existence that they lived in Bodie. And so when I walk in there and I see the first thing that I see is a church, I'm reminded that that quest, that search for some type of purpose or higher meaning has been around for a very long time, and the people of Bodie were no different. Obviously, a big part of anybody's life at Bodie was shelter. And so when I'm thinking about shelter, I wanted to go to the guy's life that I knew the most about, and that would have been Pat Reddy, a one-armed lawyer that lived both here at Cerro Gordo as well as in Bodie. So as far as connections to Cerro Gordo, nothing is more connected than this building right here. This was the home of Pat Reddy, who was Mortimer Belshaw's lawyer, the one-armed lawyer that defended a lot of the big miners back in the day. And Pat made his way to Cerro Gordo quite a bit. And this was his home with his wife Emily, where they lived after Cerro Gordo. And he would split his time here in San Francisco in a different office. But it's interesting to think that, you know, the guy who walked in these buildings quite often also walked around Cerro Gordo. He was infamous. He got Belshaw off of some of the biggest cases you can imagine. And after sitting outside his house, I try to think about what Reddy must have came home to every day. He must have been stressed out about the cases he was working on, you know, the shenanigans that his gunslinger brother must have gotten into that day, and all these anxieties. And maybe he would have turned around and looked at the hill beyond the mill, and it would have been a similar view to what I was standing in. And you know, thinking about that and understanding how complex his life was and all the lives around him gives a lot more context and meaning to exploring Bodie. If you try to put yourself in those shoes and think that through, it just provides a richness to the experience of exploring these abandoned places. From here, we will continue our tour. If you look at a lot of the roofs here at Bodie and back at Cerro Gordo, you'll see it like this. And these are old oil tins that they would flatten out and use as roofing. So you see this in all the mining towns. You know, they're just making do with whatever they had. So you'll see a lot of roofs like that, a lot of sheet metal because it's obviously easier to carry. And then the majority wood buildings, as you see. You know, mining camps, they would expect to last 5 or 8 years at most. And so they weren't building these things for longevity. So the buildings that we have left, we got to really try to preserve, which is a big thing that they do here at Bodie and a big thing that I try to do at Cerro Gordo. You know, I think our approaches are different.
My name's Brad Sturdivant.
So I own an abandoned mining town, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of thought and debate that goes in my mind about restoring buildings, because it's how much of a building can I restore with it still being the same building? I think about that type of stuff a lot. And I know that Bodie has the mentality of arrested decay, right? That's the mentality. And so can you explain what that means and kind of how that maybe has changed over the years, or what the thought is now these days?
On the lighter side of it, it's keep the buildings from falling down, but still make them look like they are.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
Arrested decay.
Yep.
It's kind of like us. How much time do we spend on our bodies?
Right.
Try to keep ourselves healthy and alive, you know, but we're still going to decay.
Yeah. All right.
And you kind of have to pick a spot on a building. You know,
right.
Like you look at a piece of a foundation, let's say on a building, and you'll go, okay, this part of the foundation's trash. We need to do something with it. We need to fix it. We'll look at it, and then while we're doing that, we'll look at the rest of the building. We'll say, okay, if we fix this year, it's going to last another year. And maybe next year we have to come in and fix another part of it. Mm-hmm. The idea behind it is make it so that it still appears historic.
Right.
And you try to hide the modern intrusion that you're creating.
Got it. Right. When I was over by the jail, it's incredible that that's still standing, but then there's no windows.
Right.
And so how do you make the call for that building to have windows, but that building doesn't have windows, you know?
Well, state of California in 1962, when they acquired the property, they decided, okay, we're not going to be able to take this back to the 1880s when it was in its heyday.
Right.
Main reason being 90% of the town is gone.
That's right. Yes.
So we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So they picked 1962
okay.
as a date to say, okay, we can do our best to keep it in the state it was in 1962.
If jail didn't have windows in 1962, it's not getting windows now.
No.
That's the mentality. Got it.
So there's no major reconstruction done at Bodie. There's no buildings that weren't there in 1962. And if a building falls down, it stays down. They do a lot of efforts. You know, they do a lot of stabilization. So basically making sure that the building doesn't fall over, internal stabilization, new roofs. That's something that they do. They put on new roofs and a variety of different things. But it's a really interesting mentality, especially for me as somebody who owns a mining town from the 1800s with a lot of buildings that do need repairs. It's, you know, how do you address that? You know, what is your stance on preservation? And unfortunately, there's not too many places to look as, you know, your peers as far as abandoned mining towns, but Bodie is one. And they're different goals. You know, I think Bodie is beautiful in its way that it wants to create this museum for you to go through and walk through and look into and see what those buildings might have been like in 1962. And you immediately get that feel that, this is something old because you're looking at, wallpaper that's tearing off the wall, or, just wood that's about to be rotten through. And so you very much feel that it's old. Obviously this isn't what the town would have felt like in its heyday. This is what the town feels like 80 years past its heyday in 1962 when the state took over. And I love it. I gotta be honest, it's very beautiful being at Bodie. Here at Cerro Gordo, I'm trying to do something a little bit different. Obviously, I want people to be able to come here and not just peer through the windows, but come into the buildings, touch them, much like the general store that I'm in. Stay in some of the buildings, get to experience the sunrise and the sunset here at Cerro Gordo, which I think is really special within the experience here at Cerro Gordo. That doesn't mean that I'm at odds with Bodie or that Bodie's at odds with Cerro Gordo. I think there's a lot of overlap in what both places are trying to do. So by 1880, Bodie had a reported 10,000 residents. If you read some stories, it says that it was the second or thirdest largest city in California at the time. But as with many mining towns, that was probably exaggerated. If you really dive into it, it might have been the 6th or 7th biggest city in California at the time. But still, that's a massive city in the middle of these hills. But like other mining towns, Bodie suffered the boom-bust cycle. And so after 1880, by the 1890s, it started dwindling. And Bodie, like many other mining towns, suffered some major fires. This is the firehouse here at Bodie. And much like Cerro Gordo, fires are a very big part of Bodie's history. There used to be hundreds of more buildings here. But there's an 1892 fire that burned down 60 buildings. And after that, Bodie rebuilt a little bit, but really struggled to kind of get that hold that it did in 1880. It was never gonna be 10,000 residents again. And kind of the final straw in Bodie's history was in 1932, the story goes that a schoolboy came to a party, I think it was at the school, and they served Jell-O when he wanted ice cream. So in response to this young boy went back home, got a pack of matches, came back behind some building, started a fire that burned down the majority of Bodie's remaining buildings. And just looking in that fire hall and thinking about the devastating fires that Bodie's been through reminded me of the devastating fire that I went through here at Cerro Gordo. And it just made me appreciate all of the buildings that much more. It just made me fully committed to making sure all these buildings stick around for a future generation. It isn't easy, you're battling against the elements as we do every single day here at Cerro Gordo, and as they do every single day at Bodie. But I think seeing that fire hall and some old photos of it and the people that were there reminded me that preserving this history is important. It is something that's worthwhile, and it's something that I'm never, ever gonna stop doing. One of the most relevant pieces of Bodie's history to me right in this moment is what happened in 1989 and 1990 at Bodie. Bodie becomes a state park in 1962 when the Kane family sells the buildings of the town core of Bodie to the state to become a park, but in the process they reserve some mining claims surrounding the park just in case. And in the late 80s, the family decides that they're going to lease those claims out to a Canadian mining company that hopes to go into the hills of Bodie, take some core samples, and potentially open up an open pit cyanide mine directly next to the town core of Bodie that at this point so many people care about and visit every year. And so there's a huge backlash against this. People were protesting, they were arguing over the historic merit of this town, and in the end, the Canadian mining company was not able to do their mining, and the people won out. They showed that they desired history more than an open pit mine. And what's interesting about that is right now at Cerro Gordo, within the past 2 weeks, that exact same thing is happening. When I was sold Cerro Gordo, the family that sold it sold the town core and the buildings and maintained some mining claims around the town. And they described these claims to me as protection for the town, so nobody could come in and do mining surrounding the town. Now, just over a week ago, that same family leased these mining claims out to a Canadian company that hopes to come in here and do an open pit gold mine. Exactly what happened in Bodie, 30 years ago. And so if you aren't familiar with that battle I'm going through, please check out the website savecerrogordo.com, very similar to the Save Bodie of 30 years ago. That's all I'll touch on in this video, but we have a fight ahead of ourselves, but I'm confident with the support of this channel and all the history lovers out there that we can take down this company as well. Right down from the fire hall was another piece of everyday life for the miners there, is the general store. And I love to try to imagine, like what would have been in here back in the day. I found tons of canned goods, obviously shelf stable things were very easy to have in miners camps. But I try to think beyond that, like what were the miners excited about? Did they get exotic produce in here? Like when the bananas came into the general store, was that a big deal? And people came and clamored to get their share of the fruit that happens to be in town that week. I don't know. But looking in the windows, peering through the dust, it just added that human element to it where, yes, these are rough and tough miners that were spending 12 hours a day underground, but they also had to feed themselves. They might have had a family at home with a young child, and their wife or partner might have gone to the store and, spent half the day preparing a meal for them. And it just provides that context to all these places that's so important when you're walking around them. This is one thing that Cerro Gordo never had. This is Bodie's jail. And it looks pretty small compared to how big the population was. But this is where obviously people that got in trouble would come and stay. And it's interesting to think about like how many incidents there must have been in a town of 10,000 people, drinking all night, gambling, and the fact that Cerro Gordo doesn't have one, No trip to Bodie would have been complete without seeing the bank. This is the site of something else that Cerro Gordo never had. This is the site of the Bodie Bank. And the whole building, you can see the footprint was pretty big, burned down in their 1932 fire. But the vault remains. And even though Bodie was, one of these lawless places, there was never a record of the bank being robbed. It's pretty cool to look in there and still see all of that. Cerro Gordo doesn't have a bank, and here I like to imagine miners tucking their earnings away by trees and old coffee tins. But you have to think, money was obviously a big part of mining. These miners weren't spending 12 hours a day underground because they loved the smell of, dynamite-laced rock. They were there to make money. That's why the towns were founded, and that's what drove them. And so obviously having somebody secure to put that must have been really important to a lot of miners in Bodie. And then as you're by the bank, if you were to turn around, you see the mill. One of the most impressive and probably important buildings at Bodie is the Standard Stamp Mill. This was the mill that was used to refine the ore from the Standard mine, and that is the mine that built Bodie. And as the story goes, in 1861, they discovered this mine, originally called the Bunker Hill Mine. And originally they didn't find too much, so the two owners of it went off around the state, found other things to do, but then eventually returned to give it one last shot, one final go before calling it quits on the Bunker Hill Mine. And they were putting back a tunnel, and one day the tunnel collapsed. These guys' hearts sank. That was their life's work, was to try to develop this mine. So as they approached to inspect the damage on the tunnel, they discovered that the tunnel had collapsed, revealing the largest body of gold in all of Bodie. And so talk about a last stand mine. That is the definition of one. So these guys, still not flush, decided to sell it for $67,000. And in 1898, the original mill, originally built of wood, burnt down, but they rebuilt it a few years later, and it still stands today, probably the most impressive building in the Bodie skyline. I try to imagine how many different people would walk through the doors of that stamp mill at all hours of the day, and their life kind of revolved around that building. That was their life in a lot of ways. People would spend the best years of their life inside of that building. There's a sense of wonder that comes along with abandoned buildings. There's a familiar feeling of nostalgia
hinting at the memories lost. It's a reminder of our own mortality, the inevitable progress of history, and that our time will pass one day as well. Whenever I look in one of these old buildings and I see chairs and tables and clothes, I'm reminded that all these items we produce and insert into our lives with such care will far outlive us, and the purposes in which we use them today. That cabinet in the corner was someone's life's work. There was probably a debate about what style of cabinet to hang. Somebody hung it with such precision, excited about the new addition. And now it just sits there. One clue left behind of a past that was once a present. And scattered across the room is a history that isn't overly curated. And I think that's why it's beautiful, because it just seems more genuine, less put together in today's highly manicured reality, a true look back into the past. And everything about the building tells a story of who used to be there. Each of those items is a clue. And between those clues, your mind fills in the blanks, tries to imagine what that space might have looked like when it was full. Who was last there? Why did they leave? What were their hopes and dreams? And in that imagination, there's this presence that just lingers in abandoned buildings. If you've ever been in one, you know that feeling. That each building has a presence, a collection of all these clues mixing together with your imagination and giving you this feeling when you're in there. And that feeling is what we're drawn to. We're drawn to anything that elicits an emotion. And I think abandoned places, they bring out these emotions and draw us close. Maybe it's a longing for the past or a sense of sadness. The same reason we watch old movies or listen to sad songs, because they bring out those emotions in us. And I think that's part of the reason why I love places like Bodie and Cerro Gordo, because they make you feel something. They draw you into the past and they show you the past during the present as well as what the future holds, all in one glimpse. And it's a really powerful experience. So that's it. That's Bodie State Park. If you have the opportunity, I definitely recommend checking it out. It is amazing. History is so important, and being able to experience it firsthand with walking the streets is really special. It just gives you an even greater sense of appreciation for everything that happened there. And to me, it also gives me just a sense of comfort in knowing that many generations of people have overcome the same problems that you and I face every day. Problems that we think are so unique to us. A mining company trying to do an open pit mine at the edge of my town, a fire destroying the majority of the town that I live in. These are problems that aren't necessarily unique. People have overcome these in the past, and people will continue to overcome them in the future. And when I think about it, that's one of the most important lessons that we can take from history, that we can take from millions of people before us that have overcome similar issues. That's the reason that you and I are here, because our ancestors overcame these issues, and so will we. And there's a level of comfort in that. And it also makes you test your morals. For me, when I think to what happened at Bodie in the 1980s, and I think about the group that came together to overcome this international mining company and preserve the history of Bodie, it makes me think about what I do in my shoes and how what I do today will have ramifications in the future. And there's some type of courage that comes from knowing that somebody in the past stood up for something that they believed in, and now many generations get to benefit from it. And so I think no matter where you are, no matter what you're trying to solve, there's somebody in the past that has faced a similar issue to you. And if you can look to that, you should be able to draw out some comfort, some understanding that this will go away. You will triumph and life will go on. And all that to say, understanding history allows us to better understand the human experience. And I think that's what we're all after in some way, to better understand the world and our place in it. And so for this week, I hope you guys have the opportunity to explore some type of unique and interesting history. I hope you find some comfort and courage in that. And until next time, I'm signing out. and I hope you guys have an amazing week.